YouTube warbles on a lot here. I don't know much about arty-farty stuff, but I do know that once upon a time Cubism was a thing back in the 1920s and 30s. And back then, aluminum to the Americanos, was really quite expensive. Back in the days before the War of Two, so this is a one-piece cast aluminium Cubist kettle, which my father bought for his first wife in the town of Gosford on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Being the issue of his second wife, I'm not entirely certain on all of the details, but I do know he was married when he was 28 years old and he was born in 1909. So to my way of thinking, he must have been married no later than February 1938, because in February 1938 he turned 29. And my eldest sister was born in 1939 in February. And Australia, as part of the Great British Empire, did not enter World War II until September 1939. So my guesstimation is that this thing was probably purchased on the way home from Sydney in 1939, sometime after taking my eldest sister down to the Big Smoke to show her off to her mother's relatives. And that would account for it having been considered both the height of fashion and wildly expensive. Because one thing that I grew up knowing about this was that you were never, ever allowed to let it boil dry, because if it boiled dry, it would probably crack from the excessive heat. And if it didn't crack from the heat as soon as it boiled dry, if anybody was foolish enough as to pour cold water into it while it was hot, then it would certainly crack. And that was never permitted to happen, because I think the old man might have paid £6 for this thing. And let's face it, in 1945-46, after World War II, there was so much cheap surplus aluminium floating around the world that nobody would have paid what amounts today to being 2 to 4 weeks' wages for an Arty-Farty Cubist one-piece cast aluminium kettle. So I'm saying this is a pre-World War II kettle, but I may be wrong. If somebody knows better than that, because they're a fanatical cubist or a fanatical kettlist, please do let me know in the comment thread. What I've spent the day doing is cleaning and polishing this thing, as well as doing some minor 21st century repairs with nylon twine and araldite epoxy to the otherwise eroded bakelite of the knob on the lid, after having decided not to play with the eroded ends of the bakelite handle, because the screws are intact and I don't want to try and tighten up the nuts because they've been frozen after, I don't know, probably 50 years spread out over 80 years worth of service. This thing used to be boiling Glen Innes rainwater, so it acquired a slight orange tinge from the iron oxide in the water. Then it was boiling Glen Innes town water, and it acquired a bit of scale in there. But while I was living at Skeleton Creek, it was drinking and boiling tank water again. So strangely, most of the calcium scale removed itself, and a slight tinge of orange built up on the inside of it. And it's going back to town today as a sort of multi-generational ancestral housewarming present for my son and his girlfriend, because they've rented themselves a house, and I think this would be appropriate. To make it more difficult to boil dry, when they were invented in the 1970s, the old man bought some of these pressed stainless steel kettle savers, and the idea is when these are inside the kettle they sit flat on the bottom like thus, entirely covered up with water, and when the kettle boils it's all silent. But when the top of this gets to be dry, as it boils, bubbles of water vapour or steam hit the underside of this and lift it, and it starts rattling and making a noise which you can only hear when the top of it's dry and when there's perilously little water in the bottom of the kettle. So in 1995, when I got the kettle, because I was renting a house at Skeleton Creek and I had a wood-fired stove with a flat top, got to have a flat top wood-fired stove for this, because if you put it on electric coils, they'll melt into the aluminium, and if you put it on gas, it'll erode into the aluminium. So yeah, it's got to be on a wood-fired stove. I was given the kettle saver with the kettle, so it goes with the kettle as it passes on to yet another generation. Behold, the ancestral one-piece cast aluminium Cubist Arty-Farty Kettle. It's surprising what sort of stuff I can put my hand on. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.